Well, my earliest recollections of Elk Ridge is when I, among other people, used to come for gudgeon fishing at Relay on the Patapsco River.
The river, back in my childhood and boyhood days, was a fairly good-sized river. It was deep enough to swim in. In fact, I mean, they had quite a few areas that were, we called them our swimming holes.
One of the best ways to develop a feeling for any community is to learn about it from the people who live there. Every American town, regardless of its size, has a unique character, molded in large part by its residents. When people share memories, those of us who listen can better understand the past.
On the old road there in the community of Elk Ridge is about the same as it was. The houses, the old houses and all is all the same. And we have more businesses since the new road went through. But they're the big changes. A lot of businesses here now that weren't here in the old times.
The oldest community in the area known today as Howard County is Elk Ridge. Some believe it was established as early as the late 17th century. With the unique perspective of someone who grew up in Elk Ridge, Ned Eckel, Howard County Administrator, characterizes his hometown.
One element seems to have survived and is evidenced in many of the stories and recollections shared by members of the community's older generation. An enduring bond of fellowship exists among Elk Ridge residents which transcends social and economic barriers and enables the community to meet the demands of a changing world. The Thomas Viaduct Railroad Bridge, situated only a short distance from the hustle and bustle of Route 1 and overlooked by Interstate 95, offers one of the few remaining bits of physical evidence linking us with the community's past. Much has fallen victim to the wrath of the elements, floods, fires, and of course, time itself. Surrounded by the symbols of a more highly technological age, this old stone bridge, constructed a century and a half ago, endures as a reminder of days and times past, yet not forgotten.
There was a time when shipping from the Baltimore harbor came all the way up the Patapsco River and docked at Elk Ridge. Of course, that was long, long ago, and the river has filled up with silt or what have you. It's no longer, has not been navigable to that extent for many, many years.
Looking at the river today, it's hard to imagine that during the 1700s, Elk Ridge Landing was one of Maryland's largest seaports. The fertile soil of the Patapsco Valley produced an abundance of tobacco for plantation owners in the region. They brought their hogsheads of tobacco to the landing to be loaded aboard ships bound for England and Europe. However, by the end of the Revolutionary War, the growing town of Baltimore had established itself as a more accessible waterfront. Tobacco business at Elk Ridge Landing slowed to a trickle and eventually dropped off completely. A new mode of transportation ushered in the next era of Elk Ridge history with the formation of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad in 1828.
The construction of the Thomas Viaduct came some few years after the railroad, the B&O Railroad, had built a line from Baltimore to Ellicott City. Then they decided, well, we're not going to let it go at that. Here is an opportunity to get a line to Washington. But what we have to do is bridge the Patapsco River over quite a gorge.
Jonathan Knight, chief engineer for the B&O, assigned one of his architects, Benjamin Latrobe, to oversee the project. Latrobe's plan called for a stone bridge measuring 612 feet in length, carrying the track 60 feet above the river, making it the largest such structure ever attempted before in the United States. Between 1833 and 1835, as the bridge was under construction, skepticism ran rampant, earning it the name Latrobe's Folly.
When it was built, people scoffed at it. Oh, this was a monstrosity. It was a crazy design. It would not sustain the weight of trains that went over it. It would collapse of its own weight. They really predicted the doom. Well, it has been there ever since, and it has survived all floods, including Agnes and other floods before Agnes, while all the other bridges, or most of them, did collapse in these floods.
Soon after the completion of the bridge, a colony of prominent Baltimore lawyers built summer homes in the surrounding region. This neighborhood was aptly named Lawyers Hill and is still considered one of the town's most illustrious neighborhoods.
All of the houses up here on Lawyers Hill were built as summer houses for the most of them rich lawyers in Baltimore. They would come out during the summers and have their plays, and apparently just by reading the billboards up at the hall that we still have up at the Playhouse, they used to have teas and card nights, and it was a regular social gathering place. And apparently it was a fairly close-knit neighborhood, even though it was just a summer-based neighborhood.
In addition to its strategic value in bringing residents to the community, the Thomas Viaduct was of special significance during the Civil War. Keeping open the only existing rail route into Washington from the north was so important that a permanent federal encampment was placed on either side of the bridge.
The Civil War soldiers used to camp here on the lawn because they had to guard the viaduct to let the trains haul the ammunition. That's the only way the armies could get the ammunition.
There was an encampment in Elk Ridge on the Howard County side of the Patapsco to guard it. During the Civil War, there have been bullets and other memorabilia of that nature found here.
As passenger travel increased in the years following the Civil War, the B&O began construction of an elaborate station hotel at Relay, across the river from Elkridge. The Viaduct Hotel was completed late in 1873 and was located at the junction of the main line and the Washington branch of the railroad, adjacent to the Thomas Viaduct.
The Viaduct Hotels was for the accommodation of travelers who had to make a change there in trains. And they provided the best of everything. The room accommodations for guests at the Relay Hotel faced generally southward. They overlooked beautiful gardens. They were well landscaped. People have said that they were more beautiful than nature itself.
The train station in the Viaduct Hotel remained in use into the 1940s. The entire building was finally raised in 1950, marked of another era. With the coming of the 20th century, technical innovations in transportation and communication systems brought great changes in the way members of the community conducted their lives and businesses. Rarely did such change happen overnight, and Elkridge residents can provide many interesting accounts of a time when the routine business of today was conducted quite differently.
That time, nobody came in to buy a car. You'd have to go out and see them. They didn't, if they want to see the car, you take it down to the place where they lived. And it was mostly farm people, and they'd even invite you into dinner or something when you went down there. And that's the way you sold a car. You take it to the people, not have the people come in like they have today. We even traded in a cow one time for down payment on a car. I went up and got the Mr. Bloom, who was a cattle dealer at that time, to go down to praise the car and the cow and her calf, and he gave about $35-40, and that was a down payment on a car at that time. And he took the cow, and I sold the people a car.
In 1939, I was called in by a telephone company, and I worked at the little exchange right on Main Street in Elk Ridge. And when I first went to work there was only one girl at the switchboard from 7 to 11 and one from 11 to 7. And that's how much traffic there was. You had to not only answer the switchboard, but you had to count all the calls. And in those days, it was a nickel call at the payphone. You also had long-distance call lines that you rang, and there was no monitoring on them. You had no lights to tell you when that long-distance operator was answering you. And you daren't go off, because if you went off the line and she came in and you weren't there, she'd go away, and then you'd have to ring her again and wait again. So it was kind of trying in those days and the equipment you had.
The storefront business was the norm for the first half of the century. Stores provided the neighborhood citizens with the necessary commodities of daily life. In addition, many residents found congregating at such establishments a favored pastime.
There was a place called Hubbard's. He had a candy store, an ice cream store, and on the second floor of his building, he had pool tables that attracted the people. But it was more or less a social gathering there all the time.
My grandfather, Lehner, Roger C. Lehner, had a hardware store on Route 1 when it was just a two-lane highway. And in that store, he sold kerosene stoves and different implements that people would need for their home or for plumbing and heating. And in 1927, he built the big building that's in Elk Ridge now, run by Commercial Tire. He built that building, and he had the first fountain in Elk Ridge. You could get a chocolate soda, ice cream, and he had a lunchroom there. He had a hardware store. He sold Atwater Kent radios and Hudson cars and Frigidaire refrigerators.
Most everybody in the neighborhood, all the way from Law to Hartley store, came to the store. I used to drive a horse and wagon, deliver goods. And most of the places I delivered was close, say Harwood. Of course, Harwood wasn't built up as much as it is now. But some places, I never will forget one lady lived over there named Mrs. Kirk. She lived across the branch in Harwood, and then you had to go up a hill, a very steep hill. And you have to park your horse on this side of the branch, and then you'd have to carry bale of hay, bag of feed, the groceries, make 5 trips up there to get up to the house to carry that groceries. But it was a job. And that's all that mattered to me if I got a job.
With the outbreak of the Depression in 1929, finding a job became more and more difficult for many Americans. Banks ran out of money, and businesses across the country were forced to close their doors to customers. Nevertheless, the unfailing spirit of Elk Ridge residents enabled them to endure the hardships.
Worst thing about the Depression was you could get a loaf of bread for a nickel. But where you get that nickel from? That's the worst thing.
In 29, we went broke. We didn't have no money. And we borrowed $500 from my dad to keep us going. And then Green Cross Garage up in Elk City went out, and we were a sub-dealer under them. Then Chevrolet came to us and said, look, we'll give you that deal too. And so my brother Charlie said, I'll go up to Elk City and you stay down here. So that was it. Then in 32, the banks closed. Nobody had any money. You couldn't get any if you had any. But we worked it out some way. I don't know how. We stayed in business.
I walked to Ellicott City to see if I could get something from the welfare. And I got up there about 11 o'clock in the morning, and I stayed there till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the lady called me to talk to me. And when she finished talking to me, she said she could help me by giving me some groceries. Well, she gave me some canned beef. I don't think there was any chicken in it, and some vegetables. And I started to walk home, but Mr. Lawyer Dan Murray happened to be coming from his office, coming home, and he brought me home. And as far as our mailbox, which was out at the Montgomery Road, and I walked in with this bag. Happy family to see me coming. Happy family.
One of the more significant changes for Elk Ridge residents in the 20th century took place in the public school system. As the school-age population increased, it became necessary to move out of the smaller one-room schoolhouses and into larger accommodations.
During my high school years, I spent 3 of them in the old Elk Ridge High School. And then when the new building was built across a street, I spent the whole 4th year studying there. Our class, the one that graduated in 1937, was the first class to have completed the whole year studying in that building.
A number of community residents were denied access to the better educational facilities. To them, the advances in today's schools seem most pronounced.
But I don't see much change in the Elk Ridge. Of course, education is different. Well, that's not just in the immediate Elk Ridge. That's everywhere. Because just imagine when I went to school, it was impossible for me to get an education. The kind of schools that we had. 8 grades in one little classroom, and the classroom wasn't any bigger than my house. I mean, the school wasn't any bigger than my house. It was right down at Gaines AME Church and Oddfellows Hall. And then after they were there for a while, the Oddfellows said they didn't want them in there anymore, so Miss Bessie Snells, she moved the school up to her house in her living room. So you know that there's got to be a whole lot of progress since that time in that way.
There was nothing for black children when I went to school. In fact, there wasn't any high schools for white children. The white kids had to walk all the way over to Relay from Elk Ridge and catch a train going up behind Relay Station and go to Ellicott City and go to high school. The black children whose fathers worked on the railroad and they had a train pass, they went to Baltimore City and gave a city address and went to city school. They gave a city address of some relative that they had living in the city. You had to lie, in other words, to get an education. You really did.
Certain changes were not welcomed in Elk Ridge. However, most community members learned to live with and accept such changes, often perceiving their long-term benefits.
Elk Ridge is changing very fast, we feel. 95 cutting through and spewing us out was very difficult. My husband, our property used to connect right with the state park. Now we have I-95 running through. But my husband used to, travel from his house on Lawyers Hill all the way for miles and miles and miles, by himself as a kid. So when that came through, in fact, they even have pictures of him as a little kid with these big placards on, marching, protesting the highway.
Definitely did say that it would ruin your house. That kind of worried me a little bit, but I said, now there's no place for me to go. No way I can build another house. No way I can pay to have another house built. So I just might as well make up my mind to stay here. But I can't say that I liked it. But I know that progress must go on.
In what were once vast farmlands, newly constructed apartments and townhouses are bringing back the younger generation. Although some are virtual newcomers to the area, many are the children and relatives of longtime Elkridge residents.
With the new building that's going on in Elkridge, that's keeping some of the younger people still here. Montgomery Woods is a new development, and that brought our daughter closer to us because she moved out there.
But even though the new developments are coming in, we find that a lot of the kids are moving in there. That they still want to stay around even if they can't have an old house. There's a strange loyalty to Elkridge. The kids don't seem to move away. I think it's very typical of Elkridge to have generation after generation live in the same house or in the same neighborhood. That's very typical around here. Even on Lawyers Hill now, we found that there's a second generation moving back.
Coupled with this loyalty, there is a growing commitment among members of the younger and older generations to preserve the community's rich history. Many of its old homes and buildings are being restored, and long-standing community traditions are being revitalized.
I believe the attitude of the people in Elkridge is going to be conducive to the community growing and improving. Yes, we have now established the Elkridge Heritage Society, and we have been working on the compilation of its history and the documentation of the different buildings that are around here. Is the kind of thing that people are going for now. The renovation of old properties, the restoration and an appreciation for some of the older things, the older charm.
We're beginning to do some of the old things that we used to do, like before we had Elkridge Day, and now we're having Elkridge Day again, and the last two have been centered at the drive-in on Route 1. That's where they have all their stands. They have a beauty contest in the morning, and they have a dance, I think, on Friday night or Saturday night. It's several activities over a weekend. So the old people started that. You know, I say the third generation of people that knew Elkridge Day are the ones that are instigating all this.
We are becoming a close-knit community again because there are enough of the older people left who appreciate the values that we had in the past, and they're making the newcomers aware of the traditions of the community and what the community once was. And these newcomers are appreciating those things too, and they're mingling with, well, I say us, because I'm one of the old members of the community. They're mingling with us to carry on these traditions. And just like the Elkridge Appreciation Day, people really turn out.
The block parties that we have every June, in which we bring out pieces of history of Elkridge, and the people in Elkridge are just fascinated by it, and they just want to get more information. And I think that shows a tremendous amount of pride in the community, and I think that pride and interest will just grow.
Well, to me, Elkridge Appreciation Day means a wonderful opportunity to get together with all the people of the community just to enjoy each other's company.
We know each other, and we depend on each other a little more than your average American neighborhood nowadays. And I think roots may have something to do with that.
everybody in Elk Ridge tries to buy, if they buy anything and they can get it in Elk Ridge, they try to buy from the people that are in Elk Ridge selling that product. And they try to patronize each other, and rather than go Montgomery Ward or Sears or anywhere like that. They try to buy here and help each other. The Viaduct is the only thing around like it. There's nothing built like it. Nobody has something like that.
I think it's the spirit of the people who live here that makes Elk Ridge different from other communities. And the fact that Elk Ridge is so old and so many of the children around us today are great-great-grandchildren of some of the people who were the early settlers here.
That's why it means so much to me, and also means so much to everybody else in the community. It's a part of us, and we're very proud of it.